Hello, my name is Mark Saunders. I live in Christchurch, New Zealand. I moved over to New Zealand in 2005 from the UK. I am 50 years old and I have Kallmann syndrome. I was diagnosed quite late. I was diagnosed at the age of 22, and it was after many years of being confused and unsure why I wasn't developing like other teenagers. So maybe I'll just go back. I mean, I'll try not to bore you with my life story, but I think it'll be nice. I've not really had this opportunity for a long time to unload my own experiences of living with Kallmann syndrome and how it has affected me in later life. Now, I had a very normal childhood. I was born in the UK in 1967. I had a happy childhood, although my parents divorced when I was quite young, at the age of 7. My father is English, my mother is German. When my parents divorced, I joined my mother in Germany, where I grew up from the age of 7 to the age of 13. So I had quite a normal childhood. So probably until about the age of 13 or 14, I didn't really suspect anything was quite wrong. I did know, however, that I had no sense of smell. For example, when somebody would fart in the classroom, I'd pretend to go, "Oh, that stinks," but of course I couldn't smell it, and I just went along with it. So until about the age of 13 or 14, I didn't really think anything was wrong. Neither did my parents. Why would they? And when I was 13, our family moved to South America. In fact, I spent my whole high school years from the age of 13 to 18 in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And it was at about that time that I noticed I really wasn't developing. I could see, for example, after sports and after gym, all the boys were, having showers, and I could tell that my body wasn't the same as theirs. I had no body hair, and my voice hadn't broken. And I remember reading something in, I think it was a book about growing up as a teenager, and I remember seeing that one of the symptoms of being a teenager was acne, and I never had acne. I never had acne problems, really. I mean, I had the occasional spot, but no acne. And I know it sounds silly, but that kind of bothered me a little bit at the time. But then as the years went on, I could see that I was falling more and more behind. I've always been a bit of a loner. I've always enjoyed my own company better than that with other people, and so I just retreated, and I would often say to my mum that I wasn't feeling like I was developing. Anyway, to cut a long story short, this went on for several years. So at the age of 18. My voice, I looked about 13, 14 years old. There were my friends getting into clubs and nightclubs and getting served drinks, and I'd be lucky if I could get it even past the door and order a Coke. So it was kind of pretty soul destroying. And I did receive a lot of bullying. I remember one person in particular who I won't name but his name is very clear in my head. At the age of 18, he would say, why don't you stop taking female hormones? And of course, I wasn't taking female hormones. In fact, I had no hormones. I had no male hormones. So that was really upsetting for me. At the age of 18, I left Brazil. I returned to the UK. My family stayed behind in Brazil. And there I was, a very naive 18-year-old, living back in the UK, the country of my birth, but a country I hadn't lived in for almost 15 years. And I went back, and several more years I went to the doctor saying, something's not right. And I went through, when I got to university, 3 years after I went back to the UK, I went to university, and I got into a fight actually a physical fight with somebody who had seen me get changed in the changing room and humiliated me in front of everybody in the canteen, just commenting on my lack of body hair. And so my response was to punch him in the face, and I'm not a violent person, but I punched him in the face and I said, right, this is it. And I went to the University Medical Centre and I said, I'm not leaving here. I've been told for probably 8 years now that I'm just a late developer. And I said, I'm not leaving here until you send me to someone who can tell me what's wrong with me. And I was at the end of my tether. I was very depressed. I was suicidal, very unhappy. Personal issues as well, with family breaking up. It was a tough time. And I went to the doctors, and thank God, because they referred me to a specialist at Leicester Royal Infirmary. I went to university at Loughborough in the UK. They sent me to Leicester Royal Infirmary, and what happened there was, after many tests, MRI scans, CT scans, a very unpleasant insulin stress test, I think it's called, where they inject you with insulin to see how your pituitary gland responds. Well, it was very unpleasant because I was basically suffering cold sweats. It's all under control conditions, but it was very unpleasant. But basically what they concluded was there was nothing wrong with my pituitary. And then, curiously, I went to see my endocrinologist, who, after the results came through, and he said, can you smell? I thought, what? What's that got to do with anything? No, I can't smell. And he said, I think you've got Kallmann syndrome. And for the first time in my life, I knew that I wasn't going mad. I knew there was something definitely not right. And here I am at the age of 22, seeing this doctor, looking like a 15-year-old. Voice hadn't broken. I was underweight, no facial hair, no body hair, and I just felt this immense relief that something was that there was something that they could do, but they did tell me as well that it would be very unlikely that I would be able to have children. That was tough. I've always thought I would have children, and that was tough to deal with at the age of 22. Anyway, so what happened was he put me on an intensive course of testosterone injections, Sustanon. I can't remember how regularly, but I think every week. But and I'm not kidding, but within a month, I'd put on about 10 kilograms of weight. 10 kilograms of weight in 1 month. And my voice had broken within a couple of months. And it was at this time, actually, that I actually took a year off. I failed my second year at university. I failed it because of what was going on with my family, splitting up, and also with my own psychological issues, dealing with the bullying and the name-calling and the talking behind my back, and the fact that I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I took a year off, and I went back to Germany to work, to do something completely different. But the intention was to always go back to university after a year. And I went back to Germany, worked there for a year, came back again the following year, and all my friends had noticed that there was a profound change in me. And one of the guys said, one of my friends said, "Bloody hell, have you been taking male hormones?" Little did he know that, yes, I had. And I was feeling better. I was feeling so much better. That was in 1989. 1989 when I first started treatment. I've now been having treatment for 26 years. No, I can't even add up. I'm a maths teacher and I can't even add up. So 28 years. That's how long I've been having testosterone replacement therapy. As you can hear, my voice has broken. I've put on a bit more weight than I would have liked. But And I thought, okay, I want to know what caused this Kallmann syndrome. And that was hard because there was no internet. Although we did have the British Library in central London, and I happened at the time to live in central London. I'm not from central London, I'm from a city called Leicester. And I happened to be living in central London. I spent a lot of time, took a lot of time off work to go to the British Library and do lots of research on Kallmann syndrome. I wanted to know what caused it. And what I discovered was there was very little information written for normal people like you, me, and anyone else who wants to know about Kallmann syndrome. Everything was medical journals, some of them going back to the 1850s. But I read them all, and what I did was I initially, I didn't know anybody else with Kallmann's, nobody. As I say, this is pre-internet, nobody. What I did know was that there was no support group available, and I wanted to deal with Kallmann syndrome as best as I could. Yes, I'd accepted that I had it, but I had problems accepting why I had it. And my parents would feel guilty about that it was their fault. Of course it wasn't their fault. But I wanted to know what caused it. And so after, I'd say about 2 years of research, that's how long it took, about 2 years of research, writing to people all around the world, I managed to get enough information to write this book. And I don't know if any of you have seen this, but it's Understanding Kallmann Syndrome, Your Questions Answered. And it was published with the help of a pharmaceutical company who was sponsoring me at the time to write it. I published it in 1997, so 20 years ago, almost exactly 20 years ago. And I published it for myself, really, because I put so much heart and soul and effort into this project that surely there must be other people who would come forward. And amazingly, yeah, I would meet dozens between 1996 and 1997. I met dozens of people with Kallmann's, and I remember the first time I met someone else with Kallmann's, I was just speechless. I could not believe it. Here was someone else who had been through the same difficult time at school, who'd had very little self-confidence. And so that was very healing for me. And I set up HYPOHH, a support group, which Neil Smith, a very good friend of mine who I've known now for over 20 years, is now running. I handed it, well, I gave it to him really when I moved to New Zealand in 2005 from the UK. And he's doing a fantastic job. I've had the pleasure of seeing Neil a couple of times since I've moved to New Zealand. And he's a good guy. He's a very capable person. And thank you, Neil, for looking after HYPOHH so well and doing the incredible job that you are. And it's fantastic that there are so many now who are willing to speak about Kallmann syndrome. There are a few other things. I won't bore you too much, but I was married at the time of me finding out. I was married at the time I wrote the book I just showed you. And she knew that I couldn't have children very early on in our relationship, I told her. Sadly, that marriage didn't last. We were married for almost 10 years, but when it came down to it, we were trying for a child through IVF. It didn't work, and yeah, things kind of fell apart. So that's why I moved to New Zealand, to get away from her as far as possible, and I couldn't have picked a more remote place than New Zealand from the UK. So I started a new life here, and when I arrived in New Zealand, I immediately had organised more ongoing treatment for Kallmann syndrome, and I'm being very well looked after here in Christchurch by the endocrine team. Yeah, what I'm having at the moment is, I'd say, Reandron injections every 4 months or so, and they are really doing me very well. that they're working very well. But look, this is what I've had. I mean, I'm not kidding. I've tried everything. I've had Sustanon for several years. Did not like Sustanon. I'd feel every 2 weeks I would have a Sustanon injection. For the first week, I would feel like Superman. The next week, I'd feel totally exhausted, lethargic, and actually quite aggressive. That went on for several years, and I did not enjoy those at all. Then I had oral tablets, oral testosterone, which wasn't too great. Then I had, believe it or not, I had, as part of my fertility treatment to see if it would work, I had Gnrh therapy, which involved me carrying a little pump around my waist 24 hours a day, and this little pump would pump Gnrh into my system and hopefully get the gonadotropins flowing. And that worked reasonably well for a while. But then that was only for about 1.5 years. Then I had patches. Then I had the oral tablets again. Then I had a gel which I'd rub into my shoulder every day, which I actually quite liked. And I had those. I took a whole supply with me when I moved to New Zealand, but I discovered in New Zealand you couldn't get them. So I then went on to implants. I had implants as well. They're about the size of the end of a pencil eraser. And I would have 2 or 3 of those, but I had so many problems with infections and them falling out and the stitches coming undone. It was just unpleasant. So I'm now on Reandron, and that works really well for me. And I'm going to be on that for the foreseeable future. But after 28 years of treatment, I've tried everything. So I am a completely different person now to the person I was in 1989 when I was diagnosed. I have much more self-confidence. I'm a school teacher. Yeah, I'm standing in front of dozens of teenage kids every day as my job as a mathematics teacher. Maths is good. Mathematics teacher, and they don't know. But I have to put on an act. I have to put on an act every day that I'm going to be okay. I still hear in the back of my mind nasty comments about my appearance from when I was a teenager, and that still hurts very deeply. So for me, apart from the physical side of things of not being able to smell, which I actually don't care about, doesn't bother me at all that I can't smell. If you don't have it, why would you miss it? Rather than that, it's the psychological side which has really scarred me, and still does. I still hate being in crowds because I feel that everyone's looking at me and laughing at me because I look so much younger. When I'm 50. It's quite incredible. One thing I should add is, early on in my diagnosis, I was told that I might have osteoporosis, and in fact MRI scans showed that I did. So I had several years of osteoporosis therapy, the kind of therapy that little old ladies would take, and I took that for several years, and then luckily about 1 year ago I had a checkup here in Christchurch, and my consultant said, you know what, your bones have actually stabilised and even strengthened a little bit, so we will stop the treatment for a couple of years, come back in a couple of years, and then we'll take it from there. So I'm doing well on that side. Osteoporosis has not, yes, I've broken a bone, I've broken my foot, but that was because I was being stupid rather than through, anything silly, rather through, osteoporosis. And I fell down the stairs when I didn't put the light on, so it serves me right for breaking my foot. But I'm reasonably healthy. But like I said, the psychological scars of Kallmann syndrome have lasted, 40 years, almost 40 years. And I'm so grateful to Neil's efforts on the Kallmann syndrome site and raising awareness and and continuing to do fantastic research into the condition. I mean, he has the medical background, he has the medical knowledge that I don't have. I mean, I'm an engineer by trade, but I had a very keen interest in human biology from school time, and that kind of got me through the research into Kallmann syndrome at the time. So I know Neil is talking about, or has already written or rewritten parts of the book that I published back in 1997, because much of the information is out of date, but at the time it was the most current information available. So I hope you get the opportunity to read it. I would be very happy to answer any questions you have for me, and just let Neil know, and I'm sure he'll put you in touch with me. And hopefully, if I'm in Europe, or well, I plan to be in Europe again at the end of 2018, or if I'm in the States, or I'm in Australia next week. So if you want to have a chat or meet me, please do. I'll be very happy to answer your questions. I'm just so glad that I had this opportunity to talk to you about my experience with the Kallmann syndrome. And I hope you're still awake. I haven't bored you. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.